And so is it the case that when we're talking about the existence of orderly things, we assume something more powerful and intelligent that in effect devolves, right, or applies its powers in a downward fashion to create something underneath it? Or is it the case that we can start with simple, right, uncomplex situations or processes, and out of those emerge things that are of a greater degree of complexity? So let me give you a silly example, and I don't know if the chemists exactly will back me up all the way on this one here. But suppose I were standing at the top of a mountain, right at the edge of a cliff, and I had dragged up there a canister of hydrogen and a canister of oxygen and a very sturdy, hefty bag. And what I then proceeded to do was put some of the hydrogen into the hefty bag until it was partially filled, and then put a certain amount of oxygen into the hefty bag until it was largely filled, sealed it up very tightly. What I have then in the hefty bag is a certain amount of hydrogen and a certain amount of oxygen, two relatively simple chemical elements. I then toss the hefty bag off the side of the mountain, and it goes tumbling its way down miles to the bottom of the valley. I walk on down to the bottom, I unseal the hefty bag, and I look inside, and what do I find? Well, some of the hydrogen and some of the oxygen then no doubt escape, but is it not possible that in the hefty bag I will find some water molecules? That is to say, in the course of tumbling down the side of the mountain, the hydrogen atoms and the oxygen atoms banging into each other, and then at certain points, two hydrogens and one oxygen bang into each other at the same time in the right orientation, and they bond to each other, and then we now have a water molecule. Now the point of the analogy then is just to say that we started off with two simples, hydrogen and oxygen, and now we have something that's more complex. We have H2O. We then take the resulting water up to the top of the mountain again. We add some other element to throw it off the mountain again, send it down. Is it not likely then that we would get even more complicated chemical or molecular compounds emerging? Now, the point I'm making here is a simple analogy or a simple instance of what the evolutionary model claims, because the evolutionary model is making exactly this claim that the entirety of the universe, including all of the very complex structures that have come into existence, can be explained through bottom-up processes. Start with relatively simple parts, give enough time, let them bang into each other, right, so to speak, over the course of millions and billions of years, and slowly you will then get more complex phenomena emerging. All right, so what we then have is the evolution claim, and I'll just put that forth as an example of a bottom-up process. Is it not in principle possible that evolutionary explanations can explain the emergence of complex order? And again, we would have to say that just as we can understand in a thought experiment how complex order can come into existence as a result of an orderer, we know how sculptors work, we do know how watchmakers work. And so yeah, it's possible for any given piece of complex order that there could be an orderer behind it, but also as a thought experiment we can understand how complex an order, at least in principle, can emerge from evolutionary bottom-up kinds of processes. So the point here then on the criticism side is that this argument has either a weakness or at least a further question that needs to be investigated in greater detail before we sign on to this claim. And that then means that necessarily what we have to do is plunge into the debates over evolution and non-evolutionary accounts of cause and effect order, and then make an assessment about their strengths and weaknesses before we're in a position to make up our mind here. So what we're then left with is a question, right, about point number 2. In my own thinking, if I were working through the process at this stage here, I would put some sort of mark to tell myself this is something I need to come back and investigate further, and then I return to the argument from design. Okay, that said, I give myself some homework assignment and I go off and I think about the design models and the evolutionary models in greater detail. All right, but let's consider to evaluate the strength of this argument here. We have a third line of the argument, and this one is a little bit different. It's an implication line. It's making a therefore claim, so it's saying that this statement here rather does not stand on its own, but we should believe this this statement rather on the strength of these two premises here, that this one follows from these two premises here. So it's a matter of assessing the logic. Right? And so we would ask ourselves the question, if this were true and this were true, does this, right, as a matter of logic, follow? And I think we can say the logic is fairly good. I don't think in this case, that the logic is controversial, or at least this is not the controversial logical move that is made in the argument. If it were true that the universe was complexly ordered and complex order did require an order, then it would follow as a matter of logic that the universe requires an order. If we take a course in logic or we think about it, we can say that it's making a claim something like the following, that A is B, right, and B is C. And if that's the case, then we can cancel out the middle term or see it as a linking term here. It is logical to assume then that A is C. So I think the logic is fine. We'll leave it at that. All right, that said, let's move then on to the fourth statement, or the fourth line in the argument here. The orderer must be very intelligent and powerful. Is that true? Is that questionable? Is it controversial? Well, a couple of things that can be raised here. One question that can be raised focuses on the first word here. We're using the definite article the, and it's a singular term, so there seems to be an assumption that we have made at this point here. We're making an assumption of one orderer. Is it the case that, given everything that's gone on in the argument here, that we should assume one orderer? Why not another possibility that, sure, the universe requires ordering, but there's a whole bunch of orderers, any number of orderers, all of which had a role in the ultimate ordering of the universe here. And so here we're getting into the debate between those within religious circles who are monotheistic, that is to say there's the belief in one God, and those who would make an argument in favor of a kind of polytheism. So supposing we think the argument is sound up to this point here, is the best explanatory model one that requires a one designer with a unified plan, or is it the case that the best explanation is that there are many different designs, perhaps complementary, perhaps in conflict with each other, that are necessary here? So we might say, for example, on the polytheistic side, that it makes sense to say that there's a sun god and a rain god and an earth goddess, for the following reasons: that in many cases they don't seem to be cooperating with each other on a fairly regular basis. So we plant the crops, the sun comes out, and then the rain shines, and the crops are all going along just fine. But then a horrible rainstorm comes through, and it destroys all of the crops. Right? So if we had perhaps just one divine being in charge of the growing of the crops, then it doesn't make any sense that all of that effort would have been gone through only to destroy it. It might make a better explanation to say that initially the sun god and the earth goddess and the rain god were all on the same page, right, so to speak, but they got into some sort of a dispute, and as a result of that dispute, the rain god got angry and destroyed the crops. And so the element of disorder, or the fact that the plan does not seem to be carrying itself through consistently, that might be better explained on a polytheistic model. Now, the monotheists would have a response to that, but the point here is just to try to assess the strength here, and this does seem to be a legitimate question. Should we think about one orderer, right, or not?